Hi guys, today I will be showing you how to make this 3D hippo, and we're going to be making her in two parts. We'll make the head first, which you'll need a total of 80 bands, 8 whites, 2 blacks, and 2 reds, and 68 for the rest of her head, and you can use that as a head charm. If you want to add the body, you'll need 84 more bands for a total of 164 bands. So let's get started. First, we're going to make the legs, and we're going to make the front and the hind legs slightly different. I'm making the front leg slightly longer, or 1 loop longer than the back. And I'm going to show you how to do both, just one of each, and you'll have to pause the video to make the other ones yourself. So taking 3 single band, one at a time, we're going to loop it 3 times on a hook. So that's 1. Looping it 3 times, 2, 3. Taking 3 single bands, we're making our legs a little thick and pulling all those loops onto our 3 single bands and onto our hook, like that. Taking 3 more single bands and pulling all the loops off of our hook and onto the 3 single bands. And if you're making the hind legs, this is as long as we want, and getting it onto a single band and put it aside. Let's do the front leg, same thing, taking a single band, looping it 3 times, doing it for 3 single bands. Now taking 3 single bands and pulling all those loops onto the 3 single bands, center it, and onto our hook. Taking 3 more single bands, pulling all the loops onto our hook. And since it's the front leg, we'll do it 1 loop more, taking 3 more single bands and pulling all those loops onto our hook. So that's our front leg, and finally getting everything onto a single band. So go ahead and pause the video and come back when you're done with all 4 legs. Let's do the eyes, taking a single black band or whatever color you want, looping it 4 times on the hook. Let's repeat for the other eye, looping it 4 times on the hook, grabbing your face color, mine's blue, and getting all the loops onto a single blue band. So there's our eyes. Let's put it aside. Let's make the top of the mouth, taking 2 single bands. We're coming from the first to the second, and second to the third. Repeat for both sides, and I'm working in this area of my loom because I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. Now we're coming diagonally from the 3rd to the 4th center peg for both sides. Push it down and making sure it doesn't overlap on the center 4th peg. Now coming down the center from the 1st to the 2nd with 2 single bands all the way to the center 4th peg, closing up our mouth. So that's what it should look like. Taking 2 single bands, we're going to put our holding bands, creating that triangle right there. Now taking a single band, we're going to do the nostril, looping it 4 times on our hook. Taking another single band, twist, double, and we'll pull all those loops onto our hook, like that. Taking another single for our second nostril, looping it 4 times on the hook, taking a single, twist, double, and getting all those loops onto our hook, like that, and grabbing a single band and pulling all those loops onto the single band. So there are our nostrils, and let's loop it on the third to the third peg on both sides, and spread them out. And make sure they're pointing down. So that's what it should look like. Now let's make the teeth, taking a single band, looping it 4 times on the hook, taking a single, twist, double, and pulling the loops onto our hook, making sure it's centered and the bands are even, and loop it on the third side peg. And we'll repeat for the other tooth, taking a single band, looping it 4 times on the hook, taking a single, twist, double, and pulling all those loops onto our hook. And then adding it to the third peg on the other side. Taking our cap band, we're going to loop it on the 4th center peg 4 times. So that's what yours should look like. Now we're going to go under the cap band, grabbing the top 2 single and loop up and onto itself, and it should come to the center with a nice teardrop. Go back in, grabbing the top 2 single, and mine's going to the right. And again, grabbing the last 2 single, and it should go to the left. Now let's finish the sides. Grab the bottom 2 single and loop up and onto itself very carefully. If there's tension like that, make sure you follow the peg with the back of your hook to release the tension. And continue up your loom, grabbing the bottom 2 single and looping it up and onto itself. Repeat on the other side, grabbing the bottom 2 single and very carefully loop up and onto itself. Now finish up the center, grabbing the bottom 2 bands and loop up to the center first peg. So that's what the top of your mouth should look like. Take all the bands off of your peg, except for these 3 top ones. Now I'm going to put it on my hook to add to my face later. If you have a holding hook or something to hold the top of your mouth, you can use that. And you should have pulled off 3 sets of 4 loops off of each peg onto your hook. So that's what it should look like with the nostrils up. And let's make the bottom of the mouth, taking 2 single bands, coming from the first to the second side peg for both sides, taking a single band, coming from the second to the third center peg, and 2 single bands from the second to the third side peg for both sides, and closing up our mouth with 2 single bands from the third side to the 4th center peg for both sides. Push it down, taking 2 single red bands for the tongue and looping it from the 3rd to the 4th center peg. That's what it should look like. Now taking a single band, and we're going to cap the 4th center peg off by looping it 4 times. Let's add our teeth, taking a single band, looping it 4 times on our hook, taking a single, twist, double, and pulling all those loops onto the single we doubled and adding it onto the 3rd side peg. Like that. The other tooth, taking a single, loop 4 times on the hook, single, twist, double, and pulling all those loops onto the single we doubled, onto our hook, and attaching it onto the other third peg on the side. So that's what it should look like right now. Let's put some holding bands, taking a single, twist, double from the second peg to the second peg, single, twist, double from the third to the third. Now we're ready to loop up. We're going to go under the cap band, grab the top two red bands, which is the tongue, and hold your cap band down carefully, pull it up and onto itself, creating the nice teardrop, reaching in the third center peg, grabbing the top single, loop up and onto itself. Mine went to the right, reach back in, grabbing the bottom single, and it went to the left. Now go under the cap band again, grab the next top two single. Mine's going to the right, loop up and onto itself. Back under, grab the last two bottom single bands and looping it to the left. Now finish up the sides, going under, grabbing the bottom two bands, and very carefully, lots of tension, pull it up and onto itself, release it, and continue up, grabbing only the bottom two bands. Let's do the other side. Once again, grabbing only the bottom two bands. It's pretty tight, just be careful, don't break your bands, and loop up and onto itself. And finally, our last two bands. There's the bottom of our mouth. Take it off our loom, except for the side first two pegs. And I'm going to put it on my hook to add to my face later. So there's the bottom of our mouth so far, and you should have 4 loops for both sides of the bottom of our mouth onto a hook, so a total of 8 loops, like that. Let's do our head, taking 2 single bands, looping it from the first to the second peg in the center, and coming diagonally with 2 single bands for both sides, like that. Coming down 2 times with 2 single bands for the sides of our face. And coming diagonally from the third to the fourth center peg for both sides. Push it down, making sure it doesn't overlap, and close up the center of our face with 2 single bands all the way to the center fourth peg, like that. Take a single band and cap off the fourth center peg by looping it 4 times. Let's add the eyes. We're going to take the eyes, getting it on our hook and looping it from the second peg to the second peg across, and split out our eyes. So that's what it should look like. Now let's do our ears, and it's going to be very small. Push the second side peg bands down, taking a single band, looping it 4 times on a hook, taking a single, twist, double, and pulling the 4 loops onto the single we doubled. For our ear, it's going to be very small, and attaching it to the second side peg where we looped our eyes. Repeat for the other ear, same thing, taking a single band, looping it 4 times on the hook, grabbing a single, twist, double, and getting the loops all onto our hook and attaching it to the second side peg. So our ears are on. So now go under the cap band, grabbing the top 2 single bands and loop up and onto itself. It should go up to the center third. Go back under the cap band, grab the next top two. Mine's going to the right. Make sure you have the nice teardrop. And go back under the cap band, grabbing the last two bands, and loop up and onto itself. So that's what it should look like. Now let's push it down. We're going to add the bottom and top of our mouth. So let's add the bottom of our mouth, and I'm adding it on the third peg to the third peg on both sides, and each side should get 4 loops. So I'm getting the 4 loops off of my hook with my teeth pointing up, and my first one is going on the left side of my loom, getting all 4 loops onto that third left peg. Pull the other half of the bottom of my mouth over and under the 4th center peg, and looping the other 4 bands off of my hook and onto the third right peg. So that's what it should look like, and the bottom of my mouth isn't attached anywhere on the 4th center peg aside from the 3rd to the 3rd. Push it all down. Let's add the top of our mouth, and we want to make sure our nostrils is pointing up, and we're going to add it on the 3rd peg for each row, and each peg should get 4 loops. So pulling the 4 loops, mine's going on the right peg first, getting it on that 3rd right peg and pulling it off of my hook. So my right side is done. Let's do the center, same thing. You should have 4 loops, getting all those loops off of your hook and onto the 3rd center peg. And off your hook. So now my center is done. The last 4 loops onto my hook. I'm attaching it to the left 3rd peg. So the top of my mouth is on. Now we're going to very carefully loop the side. We're going to go under, all the way under, grab the bottom 2 bands, and it's going to be very tight. Pull very carefully, loop up and onto the 3rd, and finish up the side, pulling the bottom 2 bands up and over, making sure you have nice teardrops to the 1st center peg. So repeat for the other side, same thing. Go all the way under, grabbing the bottom 2 bands, and loop up and onto itself, creating teardrops. Continue up the side of our face, always grabbing the bottom 2 single, and very carefully loop up, and finally onto the center 1st peg. So that's what yours should look like at this point. Finish up the center. We're going to reach in the center 3rd peg, grabbing only the bottom 2 bands, and loop up and onto itself. And you should see the nice teardrop when you're doing that. Continue to the center 1st peg. Now let's tie it off, taking a single band, putting your hook through the center first, all the way through, grabbing our single band, and tying our slip knot. And let's take our hippo's face off the loom. So there's our head for our hippo, and if you want the head charm, you're done. If not, we can tuck in the charm string to hide the charm string, or you can cut it so that way he has a little bit of hair on the back, on the top of his head. For the body, we're going to find the bands where the cap band is, and we're going to get 8 loops onto a hook. So the top right behind our head, getting 2, 4, 6, 8. Just get 8 loops onto our hook, on the back of our head like that. And now take 4 single bands, getting it on a hook and pulling all those loops off of our hook and onto the 4 single bands. So that's what it should look like. And now we're going to put it on the loom with our chin facing upwards. We're going to pull the 4 loops onto the first center peg off of my hook, and the other side, getting it off of your finger and pulling it onto the second side peg, getting all 4 loops onto there, and we'll pull our head between the first and the second peg on the left. So that's what it should look like. And now grabbing the top 2 loops off of the first center peg and moving it to the right first peg. Go in the second left peg, grabbing the top 2 loops and pulling it onto the third center peg. So 4 pegs are covered. Now we're taking 2 single bands to cover the 6 pegs, so looping it from the left first all the way across to the right second peg. That was row number 1. Row number 2, we're going to grab our front legs and loop it from the first center peg to the left first peg and pull our legs out, getting our second leg and looping it from the third left peg to the third center peg, and make sure it's pointing out. Now taking a single band, covering the rest of the 6 pegs and looping the bottom 2 bands up and over. Make sure you only have 2 loops left per peg. So that was row number 2. Let's expand. We're going to pull the 2 loops off of the center third and pulling it to the center fourth. And we're going to take a single loop off of the second right peg that's attached to the first and moving it to the third. So pull the top loop off, make sure it's attached to the first, moving it to the third. And now pulling a single loop off of the second left peg that's attached to the first and moving it to the third. So getting the top loop off of the second left peg, check to make sure it's attached to the first and moving it to the third. So that's what it should look like. For row number 3, we're taking 8 single bands, covering our 8 pegs, and looping the bottom bands up and over. The second and third peg should each have a loop. Just loop it up and over and onto the center, leaving 2 loops per peg. Push it down. You should have 2 loops left per peg. Rows 4 and 5, I'm just taking 8 single bands, covering the 8 pegs and then looping the bottom 2 bands up and over, leaving 2 loops left per peg. And these 2 rows are pretty repetitive. Just make sure you grab the bottom 2 bands and loop up and over to the center. And check to make sure you have 2 loops left. I'm going to fast forward and come back when I'm done with rows 4 and 5. So that was row number 5. Row number 6, we're going to attach the hind legs, making sure you have the shorter legs, and attaching it on the first center to the left first peg, and the second to the third peg on the left side. Make sure it's pointing outwards, taking a single band and covering the rest of our 8 pegs, and then looping the bottom 2 bands up and over, leaving 2 loops per peg. So that was row number 6. You want to push it down and check to make sure you have 2 loops left on each peg. Now let's add the tail. We're going to take a single and loop it 4 times on a hook. Take a single, twist, double, and pulling all the loops onto the single we doubled. And you can make your tail as long as you want or as short. Taking another single, twist, double it, and getting all those loops onto our hook, like that. Now I'm going to pull these 2 loops off of the third right peg and getting my tail on those loops. And let's just go around our loom, getting the 2 loops off of each peg and getting it onto our hook. And I'm going counterclockwise, and you can go whatever you're comfortable with. Just go around our loom, getting all the loops off of each peg and onto our hook. So there's our hippo so far, and I'm going to stuff him with some bands that I have. If you want to stick your hippo in the water, then I would recommend something plastic. And don't overstuff his body. And let's tie the body off with a single band, pulling all those loops onto the single band and then cinching it off. And you can tuck in that slip knot band so it's not sticking out. Fix his eyes and ears and everything to the way you want him to look. And if you feel like the arms are too far out, then just pull these 2 loops up in the body and just tuck the arms right through so it's more towards the front. And he should be able to stand upright for you. So there's your 3D hippo. I hope you like him. Thanks for watching.